Hello, everyone. Welcome back to AWS On Air. We are live, not from Vegas, unfortunately, but I'm right now from Italy. That's why it's a bit dark in my room. So, good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Today, with me, I have two team members of the Redshift team, Hippocrates and Niraja. Hi, guys. How are you doing?
Hello.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, so we have a couple of things to discuss today. We have launched a lot of Redshift new functionalities last week during week two. And in this session, we're going to dive deep into one of these features. So can you please guys introduce yourself and tell us what you do in the Redshift team?
Hi everyone. This is Neeraja. I'm in the product management team with AWS Redshift.
Hello, everybody. My name is Hippocrates, and I'm a senior principal engineer working mostly with the Redshift team.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm Alex. I'm a developer advocate based out of Italy. So what have we launched last week and what kind of pain point does it solve for Redshift customers?
So last week we are very excited to launch a brand new capability in Redshift. It's Redshift data sharing, which allows you to share securely and easily live data across Amazon Redshift clusters.
That's great. I think it's important to highlight a little bit how developers used to do that. You know, how do developers and analysts share data across data warehouses? What are the challenges there? And therefore, what are the benefits of this new functionality of Redshift?
So I think prior to data sharing capability, companies, the teams basically had to unload the data from a Redshift cluster and manually copy it to the other cluster. Right, as you would expect, this can introduce delays in getting access to the data, and you don't also get consistent views of the data across all the different consumers and teams have to maintain pipelines between the different Redshift clusters. So it's kind of complex. It's fragile. It also makes data copies. So that is really the pain point we're trying to solve with data sharing, where you can get live access to the data instantly with no data copies, no data movement involved.
Let me add to that, Niraja. We do see an increasing number of our customers using Redshift also for ELT purposes, where they load the data into Redshift and they use the powerful capabilities of Redshift to transform the data and curate them. At which point, the Redshift managed data are valuable, and our customers want to share this data instantly and securely with other Redshift clusters. So that is one of the main reasons we decided to build this feature.
Right, because you kind of want it to be as simple as sharing an object on S3, right? So because some customers have a data lake, some customers have data warehouses or both. So we want to make sure that sharing that data is as simple as, sharing it with someone, which could be another team or a partner or a customer, someone that you want to share that data with. And if I understood it correctly, this is based on the new RA3 instances, right? Can you confirm that?
Correct. Correct. The feature is available on the Amazon Redshift Array 3 instances that they use the Redshift managed storage, which is essentially this is a platform we introduced last year at same time last year at reInvent. We introduced the Array 3 instance type, which essentially decouples compute and storage. We introduce a new storage layer, which we call Redshift Managed Storage. And by using this powerful storage layer, we can now you leverage it to share data across Redshift clusters.
Great. Yeah, when I saw it last year, I was pretty sure that with that managed storage, a lot of new features would come up pretty soon. So can you tell us more about how does it work in practice? Like, do I just connect to an external table in my Redshift cluster that points to yours? Like how does it work?
Right. So I think the way it works is so one point. First of all, I think we use the terminology of like a producer Redshift cluster and a consumer Redshift cluster, right? And there can be more than one consumer, and a Redshift cluster can be a producer of some data set, but also can be a consumer of some other data sets. So these producers and consumers are sharing data via the managed storage layer. So which is important, right? So you don't want to impact the performance of these individual clusters, but they're collaborating through the common data layer. So that is kind of from an architecture perspective where RA3 becomes important, the managed storage layer. So in terms of the mechanics of sharing, it is pretty straightforward. So what you do is on the producer cluster, you create something called a data share, which is a brand new type of object that we have like introduced. And then you create the share, you add whatever objects that you want to share with the other clusters, and then you specify who do you want to share with. So you can share with another cluster that is in the same AWS account, or you can share with a completely separate AWS account, which could be your partner, which could be your own customer right outside the organization. And on the consumer side, they can look at what shares are available to them. They can consume the share by creating a Redshift database from it. So you say, I create this database, but don't create it from scratch, but create it from the share. So you create a reference to the shared objects. And once you consume the share, everything is same from a end user perspective. So they can
So,
browse the shared data and they can start doing queries.
and I guess that because of the managed storage layer, I'm not kind of leveraging the compute power of the other cluster, right? I'm not, influencing your compute power. I'm not stealing, your computing power.
Correct. You can use. We are leveraging the Redshift managed storage, so we go directly there. We're not without impacting the functionality or the performance of the producer cluster. Further, because we are using Redshift managed storage, what we do is we bring the data blocks, we bring the data that the consumer cluster is consuming into the local disk cache of the consuming cluster, which essentially allows us in a as you operate over this data, you get excellent performance equivalent to the performance you get when you're processing your own local data.
And another question I had for you is, can I grant access to my data in my cluster, like read only or write only? Like how does that work right now?
Yeah, so the data sharing is for read purposes, right? So there is a group or there is a particular team or a organization which is responsible for ingesting, processing, like curating the data set that they want to share with the rest of the organization or outside the organization. So the consumers are consuming the data for read purposes, but the primary owner of the data is still the one that is writing to the data sets.
Got it. That totally makes sense. And can we dive a bit deeper into the performance of this? Because I understand you are bringing the data closer to my cluster when you share data with me. So what can I expect as far as performance is concerned?
Because we treat the data as if this data that are are being accessed by the consuming cluster, and we do bring the data blocks to the consuming Redshift cluster, the performance after we have completed this process is comparable to as if you were processing your own local data. Redshift has a very interesting data organization that allows us to be very efficient when we are scanning data from Redshift managed storage. And by using the RA3 instances that run on the Nitro platform and they have very high network bandwidth, the time it takes to get into the performance that it is as if you were processing local attached data is very small. So our customers already are impressed and tell us that the performance is comparable with processing their own local data.
That's great. So let's dive a bit deeper into what kind of use cases does this new functionality actually unlock for all our customers?
Yeah, so I think data sharing has a very wide set of use cases. I would say the most common ones, I'll highlight few. One is workload isolation and chargeability, right? So different workloads in the organization have different data access patterns, different SLA requirements. So with data sharing, you can put these different workloads in separate clusters, right? And you can size them according to their own performance requirements. And you can even charge back. So if there are different workloads managed by different groups, you can offer chargeability. So workload isolation is a big use case. Another one is cross-group collaboration. So where there could be huge organizations, tens or hundreds of business groups. It's like a completely decentralized environment with their own Redshift clusters, but want to collaborate on data. So that is where data sharing is widely useful. Um, Other ones are data as a service. So if you want to offer data and analytics as a service outside your organization, like to your partners, so you build your business on data, right? So making data available to your partners, customers, that's a popular use case. I would say another one is sharing data between production, development, test, and production. That's a very, very common pattern as well.
Yeah, that's great. And can you remind me, it's generally available or is it in preview? Sorry, I totally forgot.
The feature, when we since we announced it last Wednesday, it is in a public preview. So
Okay.
in order to use this feature right now in public preview, you have to launch your Array3 cluster using the preview underscore 2020 track. And there you go. You have the functionality and you can start previewing it right away.
Great, perfect. So it's pretty simple to get started. And as far as I know, we also have a practical demo, right? So how about we jump into that demo right now? It'll be you, right, Niraja? Can you switch your screen to the slides?
So I'm going to just start with a slide that explains the demo scenario, and then we'll walk through the demo.
Yep, please go ahead. Awesome.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep. So the demo scenario, I think, is a very simple one, but very common one, right, in organizations. So think that like we are a manufacturing company that operates in global markets, and we have different business groups that manages different aspects of the organization. So the scenario is we have a product logistics team that manages all the product related information, the inventory. They have their own Redshift cluster. We have a customer experience team that manages the customer related information and customer master data. So that is the customer cluster. And then we also have a sales reporting cluster. The sales cluster kind of holds the transactional sales information. So the sharing scenario is the sales cluster often needs data from this product and customer clusters. So they want to ask questions like, what are the top three products that our customers are buying in a particular region? Or they want to ask things like, okay, do we want to offer some special discounts to our loyal customers? So they often need information from both product and customers. So today, the way we manage this is through nightly ETL feeds going from these clusters into the sales ops environment. They are not too happy about it. It is also complexity on the product and the customer team side. So with data sharing, the idea is allow this sales ops reporting team to directly access the data that is there in the product and the customer clusters, right? So this is live data sharing. It's instant, it's high performance, and you don't have to worry about the data movement, the complexity of the data movement between the clusters. And most importantly, the sales teams can become a lot more agile, right? So they don't need to wait for the data to do things. They can get access to the data as and when they need it. So that's kind of the briefly on demo scenario. Let me just walk through the flow here. So what I have here is a tool called Agility Pro, but this can be any of your BI tools. So what we will do is share a data set from the product cluster as well as the customer cluster to the sales cluster. So we'll start with the product cluster. The first step in data sharing is creating what is called a data share. So this is the object, that unit of sharing. So it's like a metadata container. So you create a data share saying product to sales, and then we add the objects that you want to share. So the product team is saying, I want to share this department information, the product department schema, and I want to add all these different tables into the data share. So you can share at different granularities. So you can share tables, you can share views, you can share materialized views, you can share SQL UDF. So you can decide as a producer at what granularity you want to share the data. So what we are doing is adding a bunch of tables into the share. The next step is to provide access on the share to a cluster. So the cluster to which we are sharing the data is sales cluster. So you say, give the cluster ID, also referred as a namespace, and you grant usage on the share. So on the producer side, you can inspect the metadata. So we have created a set of views called SVB data share views. So with that, they can see what data shares that they have created. So in this case, I have created an outbound share. So I'm sharing data to the sales team. So I see a share entry there. And you can also inspect the metadata, right? What are all the objects within this particular share? So you can take a look at that. And you can also see who are all the consumers with whom I have shared. So at this point, this share is available only to the sales cluster. You can add as many number of consumers as you want, but here I'm seeing one cluster with whom I have shared the data. So that is the action on the producer cluster. So one cool thing is Agility actually has integrated with the data sharing. So rather than doing SQL statements, you can actually navigate the shares directly in their environment. And this is something any tool vendor, any tool partner can integrate with it. So the second, next what we are doing is we shared some data set from the product to sales. I'm going to repeat the same exact process from the customer cluster. So customer cluster want to share some data also to the sales cluster. So we are again creating a data share. The customer is adding, the customer cluster is adding data to this share. So as you see here, we are adding a number of objects to the share. So I think one important point that is worth mentioning is when we are adding objects to the share, you are not actually moving the data, right? You're not copying the data, you're not replicating the data. You're essentially specifying at a metadata level that you are trying to share these specific objects. So it's strictly a configuration rather than a data movement that is happening. So we are adding a number of objects so that they can all be useful for the sales team. So then the next step again, just like we did with the product to sales, we are also granting the usage on the share to the sales team. So same step, grant usage on the data share. So we do that. And then similarly, you can introspect the metadata of the different shares on the customer cluster. So basically what we did so far is share a data set from the product cluster to the sales and do the same, another data set from the customer cluster to the sales team. So again, both inbound and outbound shares that are created on a specific cluster, you can explore at any point of time. So now we are on the sales cluster. So on the sales is the consumer. So those are the producers. Now sales is the consumer cluster. So it received two inbound shares, one from product, one from customer, and they can take a look at what are all the objects that I got access to from these producer clusters. So they can introspect again the share metadata, and and they don't have access to the consumers, right? So consumers is something the producer cluster can have access to, but not the consumers themselves. So what we are trying to do now is the sales cluster is trying to consume the data. The way to consume it is by creating a database from the share. So that's what we are doing, create a database from each of the data shares. So these databases are references to the data share. So as I pointed here, these references, again, no data copies, no data movement is happening in these scenarios. So once I create the database references, the sales cluster admin can give access to whoever they want, like the specific users and groups that they want to give access to. So that's it, right? So once you do that step, the users can start doing queries. So here we are trying to figure out what are the different sales orders by territory, and we are using like a three-part notation where it says database.schema.object. So this is cross database query notation that you would use in order to start doing queries from the other databases that you just have got access to. So here in this query, we are joining the local data that is there in the sales cluster with the data that is coming from the shared databases. So this is another little bit complex query where we are trying to look for sales orders by territory. Again, you are joining the local data with the shared data. So from a user perspective, they don't have to differentiate, is this data local to my cluster or is this data coming from a share? They can just seamlessly navigate, browse the metadata as well as do the queries very, very easily. So this is kind of the basic workflow of the data sharing. So let me talk about like a couple of other simple scenarios. So one is, so on the sales cluster, I'm looking at a product table that I got access from the product cluster. I'm seeing that there are 504 rows. The cool thing with data sharing is it's live. So now I'm like inserting a new row on the product cluster. So I'm inserting new records into the product cluster. So I inserted some data. Now, if I go back and look into the sales cluster, which is the consumer of the data, and if I run the query again, I'm going to see 505 records, right? So the sharing is live. As and when the source data is updated, the consumers are able to see the data instantly. No action needed from a consumer point of view. They can see a transactionally consistent view of the data. Similarly, I have the share from the product cluster. I have a number of objects, right? So I have product, products of category, category, all these different tables. From a producer point of view, they retain control on the data sets. So at any point of time, the producer cluster can remove objects from the share. So in this case, I'm removing the product table from the share. Now, if I come to the sales cluster and I try to see the objects, you don't see the product, right? So I think that the most important point to understand with data sharing is it's live. So both from metadata perspective, data perspective, you whatever changes that the product cluster is doing directly, they are applied instantly from a consumer perspective. So yeah, so I think that that's kind of brief intro to the data sharing capability.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Niraja. What I really like is that, first of all, as you were saying before, I don't have to write all that configuration or ETL code that would allow me to, move the data around. But also, I like that I can easily discover the schema of those tables or objects that were shared by the producer without having to maintain a local version of that schema, right? Because sometimes, if you do ETL and the schema changes in the producer side, the consumers needs to be aware of those changes and need to maintain the new schema and so on. So I think that's another side of things that the consumer will not need to manage at all.
Right, and I think that's a big pain point, right? Data copies is one thing, but if schema changes, you have to do some complicated merges to figure out which columns are dropped, which columns are added. This whole backfilling is a pain point.
And also, I would like to add that at this event, this year has been a very productive year for the Redshift team. And one other feature that we are also in preview, but it can be used as part of the data sharing, is the introduction of the super data type, which is this schemaless, semi-structured new data type for Redshift. At which point you can also you can serve this data. Tables that have this data type, and even write some schemaless nested queries from one cluster to the other, and we give a lot of more flexibility to our customers, and all of these are happening in a transactionally consistent way. You can begin a transaction on the producer cluster, do your all sorts of transformations there, commit. At that point, the data is available to the other cluster and visible.
That's great. Thank you so much. So the feature right now is in public preview, meaning that everybody can try it. And so I guess our main call to action is give us feedback, right? We want as many people as possible to try it. Let us know what works, what you like, what you don't like. Is there any way, Neeraja, that customers can reach out? Do you maybe have a slide with a couple of references?
Yeah, so actually, let me pull that up here quickly.
Yes.
So here are some resources, right? As you mentioned, it is a public preview in the sense after this section, you can spin up a Redshift cluster using this preview 2020 track. You don't need to get any, approval or ask for whitelisting your account. So there's nothing like that. So you can create clusters right away using this track. We do have an email alias, redshift-data sharing at amazon.com. So the whole data sharing team is here. We are eager to get your feedback. So please feel free to send a note if you have trouble in like setting up clusters, or if you have any questions, feedback, comments. So feel free to do that. And you can learn more about data sharing, few more resources here. We have a blog that we published last week announcing data sharing. You can review what's new. We have a couple of end-to-end demos you can find on the Redshift site. You can go into them. So these go through the basic workflow of data sharing as well as demonstrate some end-to-end use cases. So this can be a great resource to get started. And of course, we have pretty comprehensive documentation that you should take a look at as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we are out of time right now. So thank you everyone for joining us. If you have questions, you know where to reach out to, and we'll continue with other AWS on-air sessions in a minute or two. Thank you very much, Neeraja and Hippocrates. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Alex.
Alex.
Bye-bye.